Now everybody is talking about this.
I know.
But for, I think, almost 2 years, you've been talking in the darkness. And you were published by The Observer and The Guardian, but it was difficult to put these stories out. So before we go any further, I would like everyone to give a big applause to Carole Cadwalladr. Probably, even if I'm not that old, probably the best investigative journalist I come to meet in my career, and that's why it seemed so important to me that you were part of the movie. And I also want to tell you this, that you are giving some hopes to a lot of young journalists in France who see your work as some kind of an inspiration, as a possibility to work even when it doesn't seem possible. So before going any further, I just wanted to give you this because
that's very kind. But that's very kind. Thomas being much too kind. Then, but it's really funny because watching it as well, the thing which I said there, which is that we don't have the answers to this, and we still don't have it. Facebook does. I think that's really important. That thing is that those answers are on Facebook servers, and what actually happened during the Trump campaign and what happened during the Brexit campaign. And so I think it's very important. Charles, we've got sitting here down the front, Charles Creel is the advisor to the DCMS committee in Parliament, which is doing this tremendous job of calling witnesses and keep on calling Mark Zuckerberg. And I just think that's incredibly important because there's this whole get over it. It's certainly in Britain, but unless we know what happened, unless we can call things to account, then it really does feel that we're sort of slipping into darkness. I don't know, maybe that's me just being overly depressing, but let's put to Thomas.
No, but I do want to ask you this, Carole, because you're, very modest, and that's what I think it makes you very good with sources. I will not big you up too much. You obviously protected Chris over a long period of time. I got to know you midway through that point. But can you just, because I don't think people realise quite how lonely it was, and the obstacles you're facing. For example, it's only just expired, hasn't it, the legal threat from Cambridge Analytica?
Yeah, it has, and that did make it very difficult. But I think it's also illustrative of the fact that Tomo is from Spice Media with Spicy, which I'd never heard of. And of course, so when he said, can I interview you? And I was like, who's it for? Very suspiciously. And he was like, oh, this is a French website. You'll never see it. It'll just be online somewhere in French. So I kind of I totally got tricked into this. But it just in the sense that there was just a few independent kind of journalists and investigators. So Paul, who's in the film, is very, very important to the whole of the Cambridge Analytica story, and it would literally never have happened, anything, I don't think, really, without him. He helped me with my first piece, he went on and he helped you with this, didn't he? So it's kind of...
So three boots there.
That's a sort of citizen investigator did that.
He's not a journalist.
No, he's not a journalist, no.
So he followed data. That was one route. You could actually follow the data, and there's a guy, Paul Vickery.
He was worried about his own data. He was a Swiss citizen, and he happened that he answered the psychology questionnaire that's mentioned in the film. In 2012, he was part of the experiment of Michal Kosinski, and he wanted to know what this data could have been used for. And that's how we got into this story. But I think that the Cambridge Analytica story, the Trump campaign story, illustrates how journalists need active citizens and active people who want to release information that we don't have, and we don't have the coercing, we don't have the power to make them speak if they don't want to, and we are not the police. Maybe you would like sometimes, but we are not. And I think that it really illustrates that if we want to be able to defend our democracy in the coming years, we are going to have to work together. And it's going to be even harder to work together in a society where journalists are always seen as the conspiracy part, We are part of the conspiracy to trick the people into changes they don't want, into things they don't like. So I think that we have to recreate this kind of confidence between the public and journalists and directors like myself. But for this, we need to have somehow a higher standard. And that's also what lots of journalists are trying to do, creating the Byline, what you're doing with Byline, what you're doing with the Observer, what we are at our very small level are trying to do with Spicy in France. So somehow you have to understand this too. And everybody's always saying, well, media is shit, media is very bad. And when they put on their television or when they go on a website, well, they don't go on the BBC or they don't read the Observer. They go to other things, maybe not as good quality as I would imagine, but and then they criticize. And I think there's a contradiction into this. We are totally able to face contradiction and criticism, but somehow the people should help us a little bit more and maybe be a little bit less lazy when they come back from work. I know it's hard. We all work and it's very hard for everyone. But we really need the people. We really need the public to work like we did. And I think that's something that the Frontline Club is expressing to. It's this possibility to have a connection between media professionals and the public.
So is that particularly you, Thomas? Earlier on you were talking about the journalist and the citoyen, the citizen. Is this something people talk about in France? Because they don't talk about it here, we're subjects anyway, we're not citizens. Is this something you do, or is this, because France was ahead of the game, you were a little bit ahead of this game, because the right-wing fake news sites in France went with Marine Le Pen well before we experienced them, that's what, is that right?
Yes, somehow maybe we got touched by this far-right and extreme-right populism movement a little bit earlier because it was more structured. There's always been an extreme right very present in France. Le Front National, it's much higher than National Front here. And yes, they created, it's like this, I don't know if you know about this, it's not a politician, it's a political scientist, Gramsci, from the early 20th century. He was a communist and he used to say that to win in politics, to win elections, you have to win the cultural battle first. And the big trouble with Gramsci is that he was only heard by extreme right people. And with the rise of the internet, they understood it very well. We talked about Breitbart in the United States. We could talk about dozens of extreme right websites similar to Breitbart or worse. In France, there's the same thing in Germany, in Italy. And we were maybe touched a little bit earlier about all of this movement also because of the terrorist attack. We've been living in 2015 in France and the attacks on the journalist of Charlie Hebdo.
One of the things I found really fascinating about your film then was just the fact that, because we're very concentrated on Mueller and Trump-Russia collusion and all the rest of it, but actually there's sort of these very simple cases of just like massive illegal overspending there as well from them.
In this movie, I was sure that for years and years and years, billionaires have founded politics in the US. But no, it was not true. Before 2010 and the Citizen United ruling by the Supreme Court, it was impossible for billionaires to found millions into politics. And with this ruling, it was possible to create what they call the PACs or super PACs. The super PACs cannot have connection with the campaign, but it seems like they do a little bit. And when we went through all the foundings of the campaign, yes, we discovered this company, Glittering Steel, that belongs to Steve Bannon, and that was receiving lots of money from the Make America #1 super PAC, the one that belonged to Robert Mercer, and there was never some kind of any work they were doing, you know? It was the same kind of questions, like they receive some money, but they don't do the work. In your case, they don't receive the money, but they do the work.
Well, yeah, and also it's just sort of like, I feel so frustrated in a way with watching your film again, because that's a sunk cost. So the billions that Robert Mercer put into Cambridge Analytica, that's a sunk cost that doesn't have to be declared. You know, as you say, it's just a way of funneling money into politics without having to declare it on any form. And so we know that Cambridge Analytica did this work for Leave.eu. We know that Leave.eu used that work, called it the backbone of it. We now have the invoice that they sent for that preliminary work. We now know that money was paid for that invoice. The Electoral Commission knows all of this, and they came out with this ruling 2 weeks ago and sort of said, oh no, we didn't find any evidence of wrongdoing there. Ugh. You know, I've now kind of FOI'd, I've been another big FOI of all correspondence ever about Cambridge Analytica, the Electoral Commission has done. But they said to me in the last communication that they had that invoice. I don't know, Charles is smiling as if you might have some secret information.
I'm just very happy.
You're happy?
Was that decision made?
Person in general.
Was the decision made with the presence of that invoice?
Yeah, they have that invoice.
How much was the invoice for?
But 40,000. But
it's kind of fascinating because there's a little snippet, isn't there, which we're holding back, but that building might come into it.
Yeah, the ridiculous thing is...
Next time we meet in Beverly Hills.
Wiltshire. Bannon, we now know that Bannon and Farage got close around 2010-11, and so there's 3 years of work of Cambridge Analytica for Farage. It didn't become Leave EU, it was Go, it was all these other campaigns. And meanwhile, Farage himself said that Breitbart won it for him. So that's not even accounted for the news.
It's exactly the same nexus.
Yeah.
And also the strategy which we heard about there of identifying that small sliver of voters and going to those areas. And that is exactly what Leave.eu, I mean, they were this is in that initial conversation I had with Andy Wigmore, it's all in there. You know, they identified these 12 areas, they went back and they went back and they went back. And they just pumped out the Trumpian disinformation, they used the keywords, etc.
And Chris remembers.
It's such a parallel. Everything you see that happened with the Trump campaign they were doing on some level in Britain, and they called it Andy Wigmore. You know, it was the trial run. This was why Cambridge Analytica was one of the reasons why they were kind of happy to help.
But Carole, you discovered not only Leave EU, which was the non-official campaign, the Farage campaign. We can now, I mean, thanks to your investigations, this is slightly more up to date and hopefully be in your new film, that it looks like, can we say it looks like, there was also coordination with the other more official, sort of scrubbed up, clean, Matthew Elliott, Gove Johnson campaign, i.e. the Vote Leave campaign. Can we talk about that a bit, since obviously it's a British audience and they're probably quite interested in a potential collusion, coordination, overspending and a conspiracy to further the course of justice, possibly.
So we know that, a week after I published the first article which I did on Robert Mercer, which was a year ago in February, so 16 months or something ago. And I wrote about these connections and Robert Mercer and Steve Bannon, Leave.eu and Farage. And then a week later, a Canadian reader got in touch, a few days later, and said this company in Canada called Aggregate IQ, and it worked for Vote Leave, it worked for the official campaign and it said, but I found this website that the same guy, his telephone number is the same as it is for SCL Canada, so the Canadian branch office of Cambridge Analytica. And so I was like, oh my God, and so what was sort of most fascinating about this was, so there's this link between Leave.eu and between Vote Leave, but it was hidden. And that was the most interesting thing about it.
What did he say about AIQ? How did he come across? Because he admitted they'd used AIQ, which we can.
Oh well, he said, well, initially he was out there when I published all this stuff about Cambridge Analytica and Leave.eu. He was really pissed off because I was presenting Leave.eu as the evil geniuses with this very clever technology, blah blah blah. And so Dom Cummings was out there. Dom Cummings is the chief strategist of the Vote Leave side, and he's he's very clever, but he thinks he's even cleverer than he is. Maybe I can say. So he was out there on Twitter going, "Fake news is ridiculous. Of course, they didn't know what they were doing. It was rubbish. Blah 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 blah." And then the next week, we published this link that linked Vote Leave to them. He suddenly went very quiet, and then later when I was like, "Well, so Dom, how did you find this tiny company in Canada, 4,000 miles away? Why did you pick them for your campaign?" And he sort of said, oh, we found them on the internet. And then it's brilliant because you can just do an archive search, a cached Google search. And at the time, Aggregate's website wasn't indexed. You couldn't find it on a Google search. And also another 3 Leave campaigns, Veterans for Britain, the DUP, and Believe, the youth one. They also found this same little Canadian company on an island off the west coast of Canada, and they also just happened to find it on the internet. Just amazing.
You sound a bit sceptical about this explanation.
It's crazy what we can
It's
find on
just-
the internet,
Especially before it exists. But Chris Wiley says, yours big
Well,
source?
this is where I just go, the facts are out there. So like watching that was 16 months of those facts essentially didn't change in the 16 months it took us to finally, the big change maker was having Christopher Wiley going on record. I mean, that was the change, having somebody come forward, put a face to it, say this happened, produce the documents. So at the moment I kind of feel these facts are out there. Do you really think that that's a coincidence? Does that make any sense? Is that legitimate?
And Chris says that these were AIQ was set up by him effectively as a sub-branch of SCL because his mates lived in Vancouver, where he's from, and didn't want to leave their kids.
Yeah, but it's kind of like I sort of feel that journalism is actually doing its job here. So journalism has sort of, and citizens and this international kind of cohort, and the academics have been really, really key. So this kind of has functioned, and we have sort of done the job which the press is supposed to do, but it hasn't. Our institutions have failed us, actually, is what I feel.
Can I say, you probably won't answer this because journalists are loyal to each other, the Guardian's done a good job, and the Times occasionally, and obviously mainly the Observer.
Byline.
Mainly on the Russian stuff, we're very small, but the BBC hasn't been brilliant. In fact, I remember about a year ago, kind of a Newsnight report saying, oh, it's all rubbish. Oh, the people aren't swayed by these things. It's the same line as they still go on Twitter. If they weren't swayed by political advertising, why would they spend the money on it? And you only need to sway a few people. I mean, I still feel this hasn't broken through to the mainstream.
I thought that actually this was explained really well in the film, actually.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to tell you that when we were starting to work on this story and contacted some American journalists, for example, and when we were in the US in February 2017, we contacted a journalist from the New York Times that co-signed a brilliant investigation done by Carole. His name is Nick Confessore. He's a brilliant journalist. But when I contacted him to know what he was thinking about Cambridge Analytica and all these techniques, he refused my interview, saying that these techniques didn't work and could not work. And I think that's what we were facing during all that year. All of these stories seem so incredible that we don't believe in it. And I must admit that even when we had the facts, my turning point was David Carole. And when David Carole, the American citizen who gathered his data from Cambridge Analytica, and when he showed us what they knew about him, that was my turning point. Because if a data analytic company is able to guess your birthday, the date you registered to vote, every vote you did for the last 20 years, it's something else. We are in another dimension. And if you imagine that they have this on him, and they say they have this on 30 million people in the US, you can understand the big scam that they created. The psychometric test, the test that they had to measure people's feelings and behavior, it was a tricky test, the Huchon test Cambridge Analytica used, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
It was a test that mostly was able to measure your neuroticism. Mm-hmm. Why? Because it's fear that's the biggest trigger to vote or to act. If you're afraid you're going to be robbed, you're going to buy an alarm. If you're afraid of Muslims coming to rape your daughter, well, you're going to vote for Donald Trump. And I think that in all of this story, the Brexit story is the same. Everybody's explaining that Brexit was won by angry white men. It's the same dialectic. And I don't believe in this. These people were not angry. They were fearful. They were scared. Scared about the future, scared about their country, their family. And they saw lots of things as threats, but they didn't see these threats by magic. They saw these threats on the internet, on their news feed on Facebook, on their Twitter feed. And they saw all of these fake news articles saying that women were going to cut the balls of every man, that feminism is something that makes you ugly. There's some kind of a poll that's shown in the movie. Would you rather your child have cancer or feminism? The readers of Breitbart answered this poll. 60% of the readers say they would rather their daughter have cancer because cancer can be cured. Feminism cannot. So this is this whole environment we are living in that's been used in some very, very tricky way by some people very clever, the hacker. A hacker is someone who sees a vulnerability, enters it and makes leverage of it. That's what you said. They make the shitloads of money with the leverage. And they made shitloads of election with this fucking leverage. I think that somehow this shows us also the vulnerability of our democracy. And somehow democracy is not something that's here forever. Ask my friend in Chile about what they lived in the 70s. They thought it was going to stay. No, it didn't. Democracy is something that we have to defend every day. Before, we used to go to protest in the streets, maybe to sign a petition. Now we have to be citizen online like we are citizen offline. And when we see something fake, something wrong, well, we have to do it. We have to say something. We have to act. And I know it seems like a drop water in the ocean, but still it's going to have an impact. Because when you do not act, you give the possibility for the one who want to act to do it. And don't think for 1 second they are not going to do it. They will do it. We were not watching in 2016, and look what happened. So I think that maybe if I can draw a lesson of your work and the work that we did too, is that we have to be really, really more aware and defend more strongly our democracy. That's really the objective of the next years, and I hope that here in Great Britain you're going to be able to defend your democracy and come back in Europe.
These dark ads, right? They didn't appear as advertising, they appeared on a news feed. And I think the people must connect Breitbart and Cambridge Analytica. They weren't saying ads, vote Donald, is nice or whatever. They were sending you fake news. And that's this is what you say, only Facebook knows this, what they put out. So Kat, just turning to you, I didn't realise you were a bit of a techno-libertarian, not techno-utopian 10 years ago. You could have quite were into TED Talks and Silicon Valley. You thought, you believed before it became disruption in a bad sense. You believed the kind of more utopian vision. What do you think's happened to you? What do you think's happened to, because you very much blame the big tech companies, don't you, for a lot of what's happened?
Well, I think we were just all completely sleepwalking. And there were just a few very early voices. So there was Eugenie Morozov, who was one of the first people who pointed out, we were going, oh, it's amazing, it's going to connect the world, it's going to be brilliant, it's going to cure cancer, it's going to be, tech's going to solve all of these problems. And there was just a few voices. So Morozov was one going, well, actually, this is exactly the techniques which kind of authoritarian states use. And so this consolidation of power and in this big surveillance machine, we can already see it being used by bad actors in places like Belarus. And we were just taken in, weren't we? Because they just were these young guys in hoods, and they were, we trusted them. And
so is this worse? Was it worse than you imagined? Where it's come to? Has this been a shock to you? you know, Thomas talks about he would never believe this way. Is this, looking back on it, Carole, now would you say where we've ended up? You've taken 100 billion off the price of Facebook in the meantime.
I think it's really important. So the first ruck I had was with Google back in December 2016, and they came when we pointed out these massive problems with like anti-Semitic, racist content in their searches, and they just refused to acknowledge it was a problem. They denied it. They started hand-changing results. They were ringing up my editor and saying that there was massive problems with us publishing this. There was all sorts of things going on. And then on Christmas Eve, they did this, legal letter to every sort of senior editor on the paper, very threatening, X, Y, Z. But the real lesson of it then from the managing editor was that this is exactly, they don't go after you with the first article. They wait till, if this was on something like the 6th article, they wait for the chink and then they go after you. And so it's just exactly what BP had done to The Guardian. So it's just this aggressive multinationals who had such an easy ride of it, such an easy ride. And part of that has been the problem of the way that technology companies were being reported on by technology reporters who totally depended upon access. So, and I think that was one of the big problems.
But then also newspapers. I mean, if you annoy Google or Facebook too much, you can lose a lot of your revenue because they can bounce you down. Your other big legal threat that I remember around the time of publication was Facebook, wasn't it?
Parliament and all the different national legislators and news organisations just really keep the pressure on, because at the moment they aren't held to account.
And kudos to Damien Collins, by the way. I think we agree that he's done amazing, despite attacks, a bipartisan, a non-partisan approach to investigate. So we might talk about Putin and Russia in a bit if we got time. I'm going to give another 20 minutes to questions and stuff like that, because I'm sure you want to ask.
If you allow me, just to illustrate what Carole is saying, I would like you to put out your cell phone and open the Google page, please. I'm going to do some kind of a very, very small test so that you can realize the magnitude of the problem. And we are not going to hit some kind of political request or anything like this. We are just going to imagine that we missed our planes. And you're going to write, no planes. Don't hit search. Just look at what Google is suggesting to you. No planes.
City skyline, no planes in...
No planes? No one has 9/11? No one has Pentagon? No one has something like this?
She did.
They've obviously spotted you.
They've probably been listening.
Yes.
One here.
That used to take...
Yes. Yeah.
So it takes you to a truth 9/11 conspiracy.
Exactly.
Referred to in your film, and Carole, I think, just referred to it now, is the difficulty with which some media, such as the BBC, have had with this story. And I think it's you sort of partly answered the question, or partly on some of the American journalists talked about what happens when politicians deliberately lie, and you have broadcasters or the media that has to be balanced and to take what people say seriously, and just addressing it gives it a platform. I wonder if you could just talk about that.
So, who wants to answer that? It's almost the problem of, if a lie versus the truth, do you triangulate round, and I won't mention 350 million to the NHS. Carole, do you want to...
it's just totally fake balance. I think the BBC's got a massive issue. They balance out evidence-based reporting with, complete bullshit, which is made up by Jacob Rees-Mogg or whoever. I mean, that's just not balance. It's fake balance, and I think that's a continuing problem.
Thomas, is it the same problem in France? Is it
Yes,
different?
it's the same problem in France, and there's a humorist in France that summed up this thing like 30 years ago. He's dead now. His name is Pierre Desproges, and he used to say that democracy, it's not 5 minutes for the Jews, 5 minutes for Hitler. and somehow I think that when he said it, he never thought that we came to this point now. But we are in a situation where it's now possible for elected representatives of the nation, whatever the nation, to use their own facts, their own vision of stuff, and to try and divide the nation. And I think that, well, what can we do? We could refuse to interview them. That could be something. That could be something strong. To leave the Prime Minister or the President Macron without anyone at the press conference. But what would you, the people, say? You are not going to ask the questions. So we have to ask the questions. The problem is not only our questions, it's mostly their answer. And at that point, we didn't find a solution. But I think the solution would not come only from journalists. It will also come from people supporting the journalists who respect this kind of balance that you are willing to obtain.
I really want to know how you are trying to spread this wonderful documentary that you've made, and how, to what extent can we help, at the university level with sort of promoting and making sure that this reaches in a way sort of the big screen, because we're a really wonderful but very small group, and how can we really reverberate all this information and have both of you talking at platforms, because the younger generations are the ones that spend most of the time on these platforms and the ones we really need to work with.
But I've got an easier. Invite all your kids and your friends to Byline Festival where they're supposed to be speaking.
That's the first thing. And the second one
thing
is you can go on spicy.com, S-P-I-C-E-E. The documentary is there. It's in French and it's in English. If you have some friends in the US, they can find it on Amazon and on Vimeo. We are also working with the GAFA. We are.
You also teach in schools, don't you? You go into schools a lot
yes,
to combat fake news and conspiracy theories.
And yes, and if you're interested in this area, we with Spicy we created a program called Conspi Hunter that tracks down and tries to fight conspiracy theories, mostly by teaching critical thinking in the classroom. With the help of a fake news that we created, and giving some tools about how to inform on the internet. We are not going to tell them the Guardian is the best newspaper and don't read the Sun. The idea is not to give them some fish, but to teach them how to fish. And so, yeah.